joining us at the Fat Cat Detective Agency again. Over the next couple of days we're going to be looking at Anthony Horowitz's A Line to Kill.
On a small island, everyone's a suspect. Private Investigator Daniel Hawthorne and Anthony Horowitz have been invited to a literary festival on Alderney to talk about their new book. They find the island in turmoil over a planned power line that is turning neighbour against neighbour, and the visiting authors seem to be harbouring any number of personal secrets. When the festival's wealthy sponsor is brutally murdered, Alderney goes into lockdown. With no one allowed on or off the island, Hawthorne knows he doesn't have to look too far for suspects. But the killer is still on the island, and there's about to be a second death.
You may notice I'm not in my office like I normally am. This is my first sort of case on location, or almost on location. It didn't quite work out the way I wanted. So I am in Jersey. I'm here for a family reason, but I've got, due to flights, I've got a few days either side of my obligations, and I thought I would do an on location case. And I did my research beforehand, and I tried to find a murder mystery that was set in Jersey, and I thought it would be no problem because this is where like Bergerac was filmed. Turns out Bergerac is not based on a series of books, and I couldn't find any other kind of equivalent. There were a few thrillers I found, but thrillers are kind of harder to solve in the way that I like to do that. And you know, I like the occasional thriller, but they're not one of my favourite genres. And then so I sort of started looking for murder mysteries set in the other Channel Islands. There were quite a few set on Guernsey. Don't know what it is about Guernsey and murder, but considering I have family on Jersey, it would feel a bit traitorous, possibly illegal, to do a story that was focused on Guernsey. If you don't know, they're the two major Channel Islands, and they have a kind of bit of rivalry between each other. However, as far as I'm aware, neither of them have rivalry with Alderney or Sark. They are much smaller islands, and they're kind of in between the two bigger ones, and nobody has beef with them. So what I was able to find was this book, which is set on Alderney. And like, you know, I even asked in the local Waterstones, because of course I went to Waterstones as soon as I got to town, for a recommendation, because I thought there must be something I'd missed. But no, this was all he was able to recommend as well. Anyway, so I've pleasantly surprised to be able to find this, considering the limited pool to choose from. I haven't read an Anthony Horowitz before, but I have seen Magpie Murders, and I really enjoyed that show, so I have high hopes. It is a bit strange in that, so I have started it, and Anthony Horowitz has inserted himself in the stories. He's a character in it. He works together with a detective, or former detective, now private investigator, called Hawthorne, and there's 4 books in the series. I believe this is the second. All going well, maybe I'll go back and read the others. I've got a bit of an inkling that it might not quite be fully fair play, because there was a scene where Hawthorne showed his observational skills by pointing out some things to Anthony to do with the people in a meeting they were all in, and so he had that kind of Sherlock style of, you know, seeing little observations about people and being able to string it together to find out some, or make conclusions about some secret that they were holding. And some of the elements that he observed, the reader could also observe, because it was things like lines of dialogue. But some of the things he used to draw his conclusions, the reader was not privy to. It was purely something that he'd seen. So we'll see how it goes. Like I say, I'm about, not quite a quarter of the way through, just because I started reading an ebook version on the plane, and then I picked this up in the local Waterstones. So far, no death yet. They have arrived on Alderney, and the festival has started, and they are just doing all the, like, going to the book talks and having a Q&A. There's been a few little inklings, you know, all is not well. A few suspicious characters kind of hanging around, or like weird interactions. The guy who, I hadn't read the blurb up until now, so I didn't know he was going to be the guy who got murdered, but it was kind of obvious that he would be the victim because he is an unlikable character, first of all, and he had a Ace of Spades card left on his windscreen wipers of his car, and he made a joke about it being lucky, but Anthony, who witnessed this at the time, said that actually he doesn't consider the Ace of Spades a lucky card at all. In fact, he considers it like a sign of death and turmoil. It's called a line to kill. I'm interested where that's going to come from, because there's clearly a fishing line on the cover, but I thought it would be line as in line of a book or line of text, because like I say, he's inserted himself in the story, so he is a writer in the story as well. He's writing a book about Hawthorne, but this is also not that book, but another one. It's a bit weird and hard to describe, but it could also be line as in a queue of people at a literary festival, so we'll see. I haven't got my index cards here with me, and obviously I can't stick them up on the hotel wall even if I had them, so we're going to try and use a whiteboard app on my laptop. Fortunately I did bring my laptop with me because I was planning to do some work. Today when I checked into the hotel, we got notified that the airport is actually going to be closed on the day that I was planning to depart because there's a storm coming in. So even though it's still 2 days away, they've already preemptively said that all the flights are cancelled. So I've got today, half of tomorrow, all of the next day now, because I'm not flying back home. Hopefully I can fly out on Friday morning, but it means I have plenty of time. The best thing about hotels is definitely the waffle textured dressing gowns. Obviously I've just had a shower, so I'm very pink, so please excuse me. Well, you know, it is what it is. But I was reading before dinner and during dinner, because I'm by myself, and things have progressed plot-wise. So the murder's happened. It's the unlikable, very dickish, it's not a word I can use, it's the unlikable, very controversial, arrogant, inappropriate man, Charles Le Mesurier. He is like the big shot on the island. He's the wealthy guy. He he owns a online gambling website about roulette. That's how he's made his money. So he's very wealthy. He's just built this like beautiful new house on the coastline of Alderney. So it's got, you know, amazing views, and importantly it has a World War II relic in the garden right on the coastline. It is an old gunnery installation, but he converted it to a kind of summer house, snug kind of room, so he calls it the Snuggery, which is a stupid name for a bit. Anyway, so he was found in there, in the Snuggery, the morning after a big party for the literary festival. He was found dead in a very upright kind of throne-like chair, with his right hand and his ankles tied to the chair and his left hand free and kind of like slightly upwards. And I'm very chuffed with myself when the detective in the story Hawthorne asked exactly the same question that I had as soon as I read that description, which was he left-handed or right-handed? Because I thought it was significant, because if he'd been left-handed, then he could have like signed something under duress, like, you know, things to do with this electrical line project, or, you know, property stuff, money stuff, you know, things like that. But according to his wife, he's right-handed. Hawthorne seemed to be asking about it more to do with which hand he wore his watch on, because the victim's Rolex watch was missing. But maybe both things will be valid and important eventually. yeah, so the setting kind of the before this murder, but like the main events where everyone was gathered was a party for the literary festival. Not quite a launch party, just like a first full day kind of celebration. So although this, well, in one of the blurbs I saw online, it was described as being a locked room mystery, but I wouldn't describe it as that because the snuggery wasn't locked, as far as we know at the moment. But it's definitely a closed circle mystery because the detectives and the doctor are all agreeing that it must have been someone who was at the party who was the murderer. So yeah, it's a very fairly limited group of all the like writers and a few, you know, local people, and one of Le Mesurier's employees was also there, and his wife, and a few other bits and pieces, people like the band who were performing. So it does seem to be quite a limited selection of suspects. Hawthorne and Anthony Horowitz are going around. They've just started interviewing people. They've just interviewed the wife, Helen Le Mesurier. She kind of has an alibi. She was away shopping in Paris up until the day of the party. She got back at like that afternoon. She didn't hang around and stay at the party because she was tired. So she went upstairs to bed quite early, about 9:30 p.m. And then she just went to bed and well, had a bath and went to bed. So, you know, nobody can vouch for her, but she was just elsewhere. Then you've got a couple of other characters who've been introduced. A lot of the tension in the situation on the island during the story is based around this electrical cable project. So a French company, want to run a electricity and internet cable from Normandy through Alderney and then into Great Britain. And so the whole island basically is divided into, the project's called NAB, and all the residents of the island are either pro or anti NAB, depending on various factors. So like Charles Le Mesurier thought it was pro, and he thought it would bring cheap electricity to the island, and the company would have to pay the island a certain amount of money to like for access rights basically. So he thought it would be a financial boon, or that's what he claims. One of the people who's anti-NAB is the doctor, and the doctor has revealed that Charles Le Mesurier actually sold a parcel of land to the NAB company it's like to place one of the buildings, infrastructure buildings. So Charles made money from that sale, and as well, you know, had a financial interest in the project going ahead. The doctor, who's anti-NAB, some people say it's just because the project's physical buildings would block the doctor's view of the ocean and all his beautiful coastline view, and they're like, oh, you know, sorry it has to block your view, but you know, they have to go somewhere. He is claiming it's about more than just that. Some other people who've already kind of said their side is a local historian who gave a talk at the literary festival because he wrote a book, but he's also just a resident of Alderney, and he is very anti-NAB because it would go through an area that had a mass grave from World War II, including, he thinks, his grandfather's grave. So he sees it as like just sacrilege, basically desecrating the area. There's sort of environmental slants, there's, you know, it would be damaging to tourism, so like economic slants. So yeah, it's a point of great tension amongst the residents. Then there's a couple of other people on the island who hate Charles Le Mesurier, with nothing to do with this electrical line project. So one of the other authors is a chef who's written a cookbook, and he went to, I think, secondary school with the victim, which is weird because the victim is very posh and had, you know, an upper crust accent, and had a certain lifestyle. The chef is successful and is, you know, sold plenty of these books and has his own restaurants and stuff, but he's not presenting himself as being very posh. He's got a very like salt of the earth Yorkshire kind of persona and accent and vernacular, kind of the way he talks. So it does make me wonder that maybe that's all fake. Actually, it did go to this posh school, but he's putting on like a working man persona in order to sell his particular style of very traditional English cuisine. He's there at the festival to promote his book, but he also did all the food for the party. So he was there all evening, and one would assume he was quite busy the whole time. I didn't have time to murder anyone, but yeah, we haven't found that out yet. And yeah, there's a real animosity between the two of them. The victim, Charles, seems to have bullied the chef, Mark, in school, and possibly still through to the more recent events. He keeps calling him, Charles keeps calling Mark, like, teabag, which hasn't quite been explained. And maybe it might be a reference to Yorkshire tea. Now I'm thinking this through. In which case Mark's accent and such wouldn't be fake, but that hasn't been determined yet. But Mark was very angry at his assistant Catherine for booking him into this literary festival because Charles was there living on the island. And so Mark was pretty furious at Catherine for putting him in this position, basically, even though it's totally not her fault. So the other character involved in this little fiasco is the assistant Catherine. She has already been told off for Charles being at this festival, but in addition to that, concern about like having, you know, messed up her job a bit, she was also on at least 2 occasions assaulted by Charles. This is all observed by Anthony Horowitz. So he said that the events of this book took place 1 year before the Me Too movement, but even back in those days there were certain things that a man wouldn't do, certain behaviours, and he wrote that Charles's behaviour was beyond the pale, crossing a line, and he did step, on the second instance that he observed, he did step in and check with Catherine that she was alright, but she kind of brushed it off. But yeah, he was a bad guy. So on my notes I've simply put disliked by many, but that's, you know, putting it mildly. There's a couple of other important things that might be important, like he was quite a womanizer generally, not just with Catherine but with all women, but he had an open marriage, so his wife doesn't really consider that to be a big deal. She also had relationships. She was currently having a relationship with a guy who worked for the NAB project, so presumably she's very pro-project. Yeah, Hawthorne seems to think it's significant that the Rolex is missing, so that would be interesting to see if that's one of those little things which opens up much more bigger information. Yeah, it was a pretty gruesome murder. As well as being strapped to the wooden chair, he was stabbed with a letter opener in the front of the neck, which is really weird, kind of unusual, like not across or anything, but just straight in to the spine. That's what the doctor said. So gruesome and lots of blood. He did have blunt force trauma to the back of his head as well, so he's probably knocked out and then dragged or taken to the snuggery. Okay, it's a few days later, post-funeral, and I'm ready to carry on with the murder, this mystery. Progress has been made in the story, and there's a few new ideas or questions that I've got. However, one of my theories revolves around a mistake that I made when I was reading a particular scene. I got the quite important detail wrong, but it's kind of maybe pointed me in a different direction, which might be important in the end or might not, but I'll explain what I mean. So when I was describing to you earlier the scene of the murder and Charles Lemessier's kind of like death position, You might remember I said that his right hand and legs were taped down and his left hand was free on this like wooden chair. And I was developing a theory that because he's right-handed, he had deliberately falsely told his killers that he was left-handed because they were forcing him to sign something, and he knew that if he signed with his left hand, his signature would be, you know, completely scribbly nonsense, illegible, and then therefore if they tried to take the document or whatever somewhere else and have it, you know, submitted officially, people would, whoever they were submitting it to, would look at the signature and be like, well, that's not Charles Le Messier's signature, it's clearly a load of nonsense, and therefore the whole document would be invalid. That was the theory, the like road I was going down. But later on in the book, Hawthorne is recounting to someone what the scene of the crime was like, and he says that actually it was Charles's right hand that was free. So I went back in the book and I read the scene where they first find the body again, and yes, I just completely misread that. And it's his right hand that is untied and his left hand taped down. So at first I thought, oh, well, that's my theory completely wrong then. But I think with a bit of modification it could still hold valid in that, so yes, he was right-handed, so he would have been able to write his signature properly, but maybe he didn't, and he, you know, just wrote something else, probably something rude, knowing his personality, and so therefore the document was still invalid and wouldn't be able to submit it anywhere. And it made me think, maybe if he had written something that wasn't his signature, then maybe his killer hadn't originally intended to actually kill him and had tied him down in order to force him to sign this thing. But when Charles wrote something else, maybe they got so angry that they grabbed the letter opener and in a fit of anger stabbed him in the throat. Which kind of makes me think, like, what would he have been signing? Maybe it was something that was in an envelope originally, and so they had used the letter opener to open it, get the document out, to force him to sign it. And that's why the letter opener was there in the snuggery. I also think they might have used Anne Cleary's pen when forcing him to sign this thing, because her pen is missing, and she's making a point of it and wondering where it is and trying to, you know, ask people. There's another kind of weird points in the story that I'm trying to figure out, in that the tape that was used to bind his wrist and ankles to the chair is, the police have said it's a particular brand of tape that isn't available to buy in Alderney anywhere. So in the story, Anthony is saying, oh, then it must have been premeditated because somebody brought the tape with them. First of all, if I was in charge of this investigation, I would have the police thoroughly check Charles Le Messier's house, because, I mean, he must have owned duct tape himself. I don't think the killer necessarily brought it with them to the crime scene. I think they could have found it there. Like, it's a big bajillion-dollar house. Why wouldn't he own duct tape? And as Horowitz pointed out, no, not Horowitz, as Hawthorne pointed out, just because it's not available to buy on Alderney, like somebody could just have bought it online and had it delivered to them. Like, it could be owned by multiple people on the island. And it's just got me thinking, Anthony is acting as if, and kind of trying to make the reader think that the killer definitely brought this tape with them. So it's definitely premeditated and they brought a supply with them. But I'm just like, why would they have brought the duct tape with them but not have brought the weapon with them? Because the weapon, the letter opener, was definitely belonged to Charles Le Messier, and so it was definitely in the house under normal circumstances. It just seems mad to me. Like, unless they had no intention of killing him, then it makes sense to bring the duct tape but not the weapon. But if you were going to kill him, why would you bring one and not the other? And so this is why I'm kind of muddling in my head, like maybe the tape was already in the house and so they actually brought neither with them, which would make sense, or to have planned to use Charles's letter opener. They would have to definitely know that there was a very sharp letter opener in the house if they've seen it there before, because you know it's not a guarantee nowadays. Or they, like I say, they were using it as genuinely as a letter opener, but something happened to make them angry enough to grab it and stab him. So then that raises questions about like crime of passion, and you know what happened to make them so angry. Actually, now they've got the time of death pretty much to 10:10 p.m. Because some people heard a shout from the snuggery at that point, but nobody thought really much of it because they couldn't hear very clearly over the band, and it was down at like the far end of the garden, and people, you know, there's lots of party jollity. And yes, so this is my question: why bring duct tape but not the weapon? Was the duct tape at his house already? Also, why did they take his Rolex? So there are two considerations here: either the intrinsic value of the Rolex, which they took because they said it was worth about £20,000, or they took it for some reason that isn't to do with its brand name or its value, but just because it is a watch. And so it's something like sometimes in murder mysteries, you know, if a clock is broken or frozen, damaged or something, at a particular point it will show the time of death. So if that time of death is completely wrong and he was killed much earlier and somehow his Rolex was damaged and it showed that he was killed at a different time, then maybe they would have taken that with them so that the police didn't have that piece of evidence to tie it to a time. He had blunt force trauma to the back of his head, but there's no other signs that he was like assaulted or damaged prior to death. So there's no events so far which would make me think the watch had got damaged, but it is a question just hanging in the air. Why did they take his Rolex? Like I say, it could be the crime of passion, knife grabbed in anger, but they hadn't pre-planned to kill him. A couple of important points to kind of bear in the back of your mind when you're going through this story. So the back door of the house leading from the kitchen to the garden was jammed open. There was like paper in the latch so that it couldn't be locked. The paper in the latch had French written on it, which in the UK would be like a distinctly pointing towards the French character. But in the Channel Islands, I feel like it's more likely that you'd find something with French written on it just lying around, particularly in Jersey. Maybe that's just a Jersey thing, because the primary language here was Jersey French up until a couple of generations ago, and there's still lots of like French signage and stuff around. I don't know if Alderney used to be like that. And then a couple of footprints, one in the blood pool in the snuggery itself, and then one in the sand on the beach that's at the base of, so the snuggery is up on a cliff face, and there's steps carved into the cliff face to go down, and then there was a footprint at the bottom. I have to check with the police notes in the book about whether those were definitely the same footprint. Very small feet, is what I think they said at the moment. And the other place where blood was found, which I haven't quite figured out what this means, is that Charles's phone was back in his office, and there was blood on the back of the phone, and so Anthony thinks that whatever happened to the crime down at the snuggery, the killer then went back into the house up to Charles's office and handled his phone and got blood on it then that way. It seems strange to me because with my theory of them having taken the letter opener down to the snuggery, that means they would have been in the office prior to the killing, not afterwards. And why would you go back to the office? Unless there was something that happened, something about the events in the snuggery meant that they had to go back to the office to return. But they didn't return the letter opener, so it was lodged in his throat. So they had to return something else, put it back in the office. Maybe his phone? Did they take his phone down to take the letter opener and his phone down to the snuggery? Stuff happened there. They couldn't take the letter opener back to the office, but they took the phone back. And there are a couple more suspects to add over this way. There's a lot going on about this like electrical project. then we've been given a few more details about the impact it would have on the island and the infrastructure that would like disrupt the beautiful natural environment. But I'm not sure if that is kind of a bit of a red herring to make us think down a particular route in terms of motive, because I'm thinking that this crime was committed by more than one person just working in as a team, but although the anti-NAB movement is like quite a few people working together, there'd be quite a lot of people to get involved in making this happen. Might turn out to be a red herring, might not. Interestingly, the title from the book has been said in the main text by Hawthorne, and he is referring to a line as in a line of text. So still no idea whether there's like a fishing line on the front yet. And yeah, this Ace of Spades thing, which has only been mentioned in terms of the Ace of Spades card being left on Charles's windshield wipers of his car a few days before he was murdered. No idea of the significance of that or how it ties together, or why he would consider an Ace of Spades card particularly symbolic or a warning to him, and that he would, know what it meant. Yeah, so I'm that far through, 2/3 of the way, so time to progress on with it. Okay, interestingly, Helen Lamosier has now disappeared, apparently. I did vaguely remember that the synopsis mentioned a second death, but I kind of thought it might be Derek Abbott, the criminal, the dodgy man. Okay, things progress. The housekeeper is saying, I can't imagine why anyone would want to do Mr. Lem any harm. That's the exact opposite of what everyone else on the island is saying. Okay, so yeah, there's a bit of a side plot going on about with the French character, which I suspected was all just, a distraction. Okay, so the paper that wedged the kitchen door open was from the French character. Okay. Never mind. The French character, turns out, was working for the French police on a parallel investigation, nothing to do with the murders, to do with money laundering and kind of corruption around the NAB project. So because of the way she and her partner kind of entered the Charles Lamosier's house in order to access his files and look into like financial information, they accidentally contaminated the crime scene of his murder, because he was dead when they snuck up to the house through the snuggery, which means that several pieces of evidence that were around the scene can kind of be discounted because they were left there by these French detectives several hours after the murder. So we have to go back to my whiteboard and remove some pieces of the equation. Okay, so I didn't even have the French girl on my whiteboard because I never considered her really a suspect, despite her very suspicious behaviour, but that's all been explained. So what do I need to change? I need to... Okay, the back door of the house is fixed open. That's been explained. It doesn't mean that the killer didn't take advantage of it later on, but the killer didn't put the paper into the door lock to fix it open. The footprint in blood belonged to the French police officer, as did the footprint in the sand at the bottom of the stairs. So the French police officers explained that in order to get into Charles's computer and get his financial information, they took his phone out of his pocket. He had been killed with the phone in the pocket. They unlocked it with his thumbprint from his hand, and they didn't cut the tape in order to free his hand. It was already free, but that unlocked the phone, and then so they could go up to the office, access the computer from his all the passwords on a file and his phone, and they left the phone in the office. So that explains why it had blood on it, but it was in the office, not in the snuggery. So they can take that bit out. Now, this €2 coin, they claim that they didn't drop any money, you know, and they, like, we're not idiots, we wouldn't have dropped money in the snuggery. Although, I mean, clearly they are idiots, well, or just not, you know, very good police officers. But the female officer, I think her name's pronounced something like Meiser. I don't know, I've seen it written down, I haven't heard it said, but she said that she left her purse in the entrance hallway of the house when she went to the party, and when she collected it on her way out, she noticed it had been opened and money taken from it. Meiser said it was a €50 note and some coins had been spilled as well. She suspects Catherine Harris of stealing the money. No particular reason given, other than maybe she's like the youngest and the poorest member of the party, and she was at that party, moving around, walking around. So for the moment anyway, I'm going to leave the €2 coin on the notes, though why someone would take money from Meiser's purse, go to the murder scene, and then, like, it is possible, like they did it as two separate things, they're not actually connected, it's just that the same person was stealing money and also killing Charles. Who knows? What else do I need to change? So some other big developments are that I did record a clip talking about it, but my memory card got a bit corrupted. But anyway, Helen Lemercier has also been murdered, and her body has been found. It was in a cave on the island. Quite brutal murder. She was hit multiple times with a rock. She had arranged to meet someone at 2:30 to talk about Charles's death, because she had seen that person, whoever she was texting, go to the snuggery on the night of the party, and she's kind of like, what the hell's going on? We need to talk about this. Like, I haven't told the police anything, but I want to talk to you and find out what happened. Yeah, so they arranged to meet at 2:30. She left the house at 2 o'clock, and then nobody heard from her for a while. They had like a search party, found her. The nearest house to where her body was found belonged to Derek Abbott, a dodgy businessman. He claims complete innocence in like everything, you know, his past with Hawthorne in that case, the death of Charles Lemercier, the death of Helen Lemercier. He's completely innocent of everything according to him. You know, he's saying the police framed him before, and you know, they've ruined his life and everything like that. I don't think he will be the murderer. I think, yeah, his life has been kind of completely ruined, and I don't think he would do anything that would risk him being put in prison again. I think, you know, he might be a bit of a scummy businessman nowadays, but I don't think I think he's been a bit trodden down, and he wouldn't be arrogant enough to think he could get away with a crime again. Also, it turned out that Colin Matheson, the is he solicitor, barrister? I think he's barrister. Not that I know the difference between those two things, but he had an affair, a very brief affair, with Helen Lemercier. It's, you know, it was all quite predictable. You know, he's this downtrodden, mousy little man, overshadowed by his wife. Helen came onto him, seduced him, took him to the snuggery for the affair. Obviously, you know, she was doing that in order to gain blackmail material on him, so that Charles could blackmail Colin and hold it over his head, so that Colin would approve for the NAB pipeline plans, because Charles was going to make an absolute fortune off it all. I still think that is the case. I still think it was Charles who was going to do the majority of the blackmailing, but Colin said that he had been blackmailed, but not by Charles. He'd been blackmailed by Derek Abbott. Derek had said that he had film footage of Helen and Colin getting it on, and he would, you know, show the footage to Colin's wife if Colin didn't approve the NAB plans. That's what Colin said of his side of the story. But when they went to speak to Derek Abbott and said, have you been blackmailing Colin Matheson? He claimed no knowledge of it at all. You know, he said he didn't have any footage. He didn't know about the affair. And he was like, oh, I might mention it to Judith Matheson now. Thanks for telling me. Because, you know, there's no love lost between Derek and Colin, but yeah, he says that he wasn't the one doing the blackmailing, and again, I kind of believe him in this aspect. He was definitely going to make money from the NAB project, because he was involved in like the advising and the financials. Colin said that Derek had shares in the French electrical company that was running the whole thing, and so if the project went ahead, Derek would become rich through being a shareholder. But Derek says that he doesn't own shares at all, and he's like, you can look at the public record, there'll be, you know, a list of shareholders, I'm not on there. So the two of them are very much telling opposite stories. It's a possibility that Derek does actually hold shares in the electrical company, but just like under a different name. That's a pretty slim chance. I think it's more likely that Colin Matheson would just have lied and would think that the police would trust him as a solicitor, barrister, lawyer, over the word. It would take his word over that of Derek, who, you know, has a criminal history. And so I can believe that Colin would think it would be safe-ish to lie to the police. In which case, that would kind of back up my idea that it would be Charles who was doing the blackmailing. Although, why wouldn't Colin admit to that? I mean, like, Charles is dead. So, well, I guess, yeah. If it was Charles who was doing the blackmailing, then Colin would be more of a suspect if he admitted that Charles was blackmailing him, because it would be seen as motive to like get rid of his blackmailer. I do think, yeah, Helen deliberately kind of seduced Colin in order to help her husband, so that means effectively she was also blackmailing. Like, she, you know, she was in on it, even if she wasn't the one sending the actual messages saying, you know, do this or we'll tell on you to your wife. Which, yeah, places a big red flag on Colin Matheson. I wonder if there's some kind of document that exists that he could force Charles to sign, which would help remove his blackmail problem. I don't know what that would be. There's also the suggestion that the idea of a video camera being in the snuggery is a complete lie as well, and that, yeah, they may have told Colin that they had footage of him and Helen, but that wasn't actually necessarily true, because like nobody's seen any camera, nobody's seen any footage, and they could have just been lying. Doesn't really answer many more questions, that last section. It's created a lot more questions. We're currently in the middle of Storm Ciaran passing over the Channel Islands. I don't know if you can hear them in the background. It's like 80-mile-an-hour winds. And the rain is really coming and going. But yeah, I'm here all day. In my hotel room. Okay, so some new ideas or information. I didn't mention it earlier, but when I'm talking about, you know, him being forced to sign things, obviously one of the things could have been a check, and there was a checkbook in the snuggery. He had ripped off or damaged the cover in order to make a tube in order to inhale cocaine, but I didn't really think it would be a check that he would be forced to sign in, you know, imminently before his death, because you wouldn't be able to cash that check. Like, you can't kill someone in an evening and then cash the check before their body was found the next day and the next morning. Like, the banks aren't open overnight. It would never work. Now, the Guernsey police, who are like the official investigators of the case, are saying that Derek Abbott had tried to cash a cheque at the bank for £20,000, signed by Charles Lemercier, and it is number-wise, it's the most recently used cheque from the chequebook. Obviously, like I say, they can't actually cash it because, you know, pending probate and all that. Interestingly, the value is £20,000, which is exactly the value of the Rolex watch, which makes me think maybe Charles had refused to give Derek his fee and had offered him the cheque, but for some reason Derek had said the cheque wasn't good enough, and that he hadn't accepted it initially, and because they had, you know, this major falling out, and Charles had either officially fired Derek or like had just said, oh, you're fired or whatever, and maybe Derek had insisted that Charles give him the Rolex instead of cash money or cheque, because it has the value of what he's owed, and he believed that that would be, you know, making them square, paying off his fee. Although why he would now have the cheque as well, it's a bit weird, because it's like if he'd said, no, screw your cheque, I want the Rolex, that's the real, that definitely has the value. Why would he have the cheque? This is what I'm thinking at the moment. It's something like that. That is the reason the Rolex was missing, and obviously Charles would have made that agreement and given the Rolex away prior, like maybe hours prior to being killed. The other possibility is Derek found out that Charles had been killed, maybe like half an hour or an hour after his murder, and realised that this cheque that he'd been given was now invalid and nonsense and wasn't going to work, and so he removed the Rolex from Charles's dead body, thinking, well, I can't cash this cheque anymore, I will take the Rolex instead, because that's the value of what I'm owed. I think that might be more likely. I still don't think he actually did the murdering, because taking a cheque, you know, with the dead guy's name makes him look like a suspect, but I think he might have taken the Rolex from the dead body. And as to why he's now taking the cheque to the bank, I don't know, maybe he's just trying his luck. He's like, well, let's see, maybe they'll cash it, maybe they won't, which is a silly thing to think, but you don't try, you don't get, I don't know. So the Guernsey police officers are thinking along these lines, saying that he was signed to the chair, forced to sign the cheque. But then he's like, of course Abbott couldn't keep him alive, because if he did, the next day Lemercier would simply ring the bank and cancel the cheque, so he killed him. That doesn't make sense, because you can't cash the cheque belonging to a dead man. Yeah, the Guernsey police think it was Derek Abbott based on the cheque, the money, the argument, and the blackmail, supposed blackmail, and that you can walk from the Lemercier house to Abbott's house in 30 minutes, and if Helen did that walk, she would have gone via the kind of quarry area where her body was found. I wonder if you could get from Lemercier's house to Matheson's house in half an hour. It's not a very big island, and there is a map at the front. Let me check. And look out. Where's? Yeah, I reckon they're equidistant. Where's that quarry? Although they did say she maybe wasn't actually killed in the cave quarry thing, that she might have been carried there but not dragged, which again makes me think that it's not Abbott, because he walks with a walking stick and is and has a very damaged leg. So how could a man like that carry a woman? Like, I know she wasn't a big woman, she was, you know, tiny little blonde, but that still required two hands if you're not going to drag. If she'd been dragged in the cave, I could believe that Abbott could have done it, but not being carried. Not unless he had some help. Anyway, what was it in? Where is the... Oh yeah, okay. So the quarry is at the end of a train line. The train line kind of runs the whole length of the top half of the island. So yes, it does go past all three of those houses, the Matheson house, the Lookout, which is the name of the Lemessuriers' house, and also the train line pretty much ends at the cottage that Abbott was staying in. So it's feasible, I think, for Colin Matheson to intercept Helen as she was coming from her house towards the train line area. Oh, interesting. So Anthony and Hawthorne are having a discussion about the Guernsey policeman's just left, and they're like, do you think he's right? Do you think he's got the evidence? Have you got any ideas? Are we going to leave tomorrow? Because all the writers are being allowed to leave the island. And the closing line of this chapter is from Hawthorne. He says, "I'm sorry, mate, I can't help you." Hawthorne shook his head sorrowfully. "If Abbott didn't do it, I've got no idea who did." What a line to end on. Now, I need to go and get some lunch. So yeah, I'm going to stick my bookmark in there. Where is it? By the way, when I popped into Waterstones to get this copy, I got these really cute bookmarks, and they're so perfect for my little detective stories because there was a series and they wanted different themes. So it's a little kitty cat as the main bookmark. So I shall pop that on the top. You know I love my cats, so here we go. And it's reaching down the edge of the book where there's mice. So yeah, there's different designs. They're all designed for one character at the top and then 3 down the side. So there's a third little mouse I haven't used yet. I was also very tempted by the one of tumbling books. So the one at the top is a book stack, and then there's individual books kind of falling down the side. But, right, back from lunch and ready to carry on. Just started chapter 21. There's 24 chapters in the book, so I think we're approaching the point where I'm going to have to make my guess. Events of the last chapter were that the blind psychic lady asked Hawthorne if he would like to hold a seance with her help to talk to Charles Lemessurier and find out what happened to him. Hawthorne, of course, knew she was fake. Not only just a fake psychic, but also not blind. She had briefly been blind, but she wasn't anymore. So events transpired and he, proved that she was a fraud. But the evidence that the lady, Elizabeth Lovell, wanted to give Hawthorne was that she had seen Abbott and Charles walk down to the snuggery together on the night of his death. It was about 10 to 10, so about 20 minutes before Charles was murdered. She didn't see Abbott walk back again, when he came back to the house, because she left the garden a few minutes after seeing them together walking down, so can't give any evidence in that. But that is once again the book very much pointing towards Derek Abbott being the murderer. I'm still not sure, don't think it's him though. I'm gonna have to place my guess soon, because like I say, we've only got a little more to go. All I can think is that it's Colin Matheson, the lawyer. Just looking at the map again to kind of refresh of who's who and where. I can't think of anyone else we've encountered who it would make as much sense to be. I still think he might not have done it by himself. Maybe his wife helped as well. They're very much a pair, she was the boss. Colin would mostly benefit from, no longer having his blackmailer around. I mean, Judith would have benefited because then there'd be no chance of her husband's affair coming out, which would embarrass her and, possibly, break up the family and all that. And also it means that the NAB project isn't going ahead. The Mathesons were originally anti-NAB, then Colin claims to have done more research and looked into it and changed his mind, basically. But he would say that if he's being blackmailed, he has to come up with a different reason for changing his mind. Now that Helen Lemessurier is dead as well, the benefactors of her will are some siblings and the local school, so there's no longer that kind of train of thought of who benefits from the death financially. On a personal note, the Storm Ciaran rages on in Jersey, causing problems. It's funny, because of the angle of my room and the architecture of the building, I'm able to have the windows open for a breeze. So to me, this major storm has been quite a lot of rain and a strong breeze, but that's it. But I was looking on the States of Jersey website, social media, and there's been overnight a lot of downed trees, roads closed, there's been flooding of private houses and people have had to be evacuated to parish halls. There's been a couple of people sent to the hospital itself is damaged because of flood damage, and I think some leaks in the roof. The buses aren't running, the schools are closed. They have announced that the schools are closing tomorrow as well, so that's definitely still in place. I went down to the front desk and they think that the flights won't be running tomorrow. Apparently there hasn't been a storm this bad in Jersey since 1970s. Who knew? I mean, I thought a tiny Channel Island might have been bashed by storms every year, but apparently none this bad. So nobody's quite sure how quickly things will recover and like the roads will be cleared and stuff like that. I haven't heard anything from my airline. I don't think they've made any decisions yet about tomorrow. But even if they do decide to run the planes, surely they've got to be a bit of a different schedule, because how are people going to get to the airport if all the roads are blocked because of fallen trees? So I've let my partner know that he might be home with the cat another night. Don't know, this is proving to be quite expensive for me. It's a perfectly nice hotel in terms of staying here longer, and the staff are really lovely, but it's expensive to like eat in the hotel restaurant for every meal. This book is not going to last me another day, but we'll see. Just gotta keep an eye on the information websites and we'll see. Fortunately, I did bring some more clothes with me than I normally would. I knew what I was going to wear to the funeral, but I didn't know quite what to wear on the other days, so I brought some options. So fortunately, yeah, I've got enough clothes. And I've got my laptop so I can do some work. And I've got no commitments for Friday or the weekend. I'll get home eventually. It's not that big a deal. I do want to go home to my partner and cat. So they've just questioned Mark Bellamy about his history of thievery, and he mentioned it, well, he explained it all goes back to his bullying that he received when he was at the same secondary school as Charles Lemonsier. And he describes the bullying and the experiences, and one of the things he mentioned was the older boys would tape a younger boy to his chairs that he missed going to class or chapel or whatever. Anthony has, you know, that then was like, oh, it was Bellamy who committed the crime. But as Hawthorne points out, no, it's not. So Anthony is now thinking, was it possible that someone else had been to Westland College at the same time as Charles Lemonsier? Colin Matheson, perhaps, or Dr. Quirrell. They were both about the right age. Could it be that despite all the evidence, Derek Abbott wasn't the true killer? So now we're all catching up. We're all getting to the same point. Although he has specifically mentioned Colin Matheson and says he's the right age, also worth noting that Colin Matheson's children go to boarding school. We haven't specifically been told which. It could be Westland College, and makes it again slightly more likely that he might have been there, or a similar boarding school with similar practices, or he could have heard from the children about the bullying practices of boarding schools. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna place my betting chips on Colin Matheson and or Judith Matheson. They both benefited. They both would have been at the party. Their house is in about the right location, sort of the same distance from the lookout as Abbott's cottage, so time-wise, in terms of Helen leaving to meet someone in half an hour, she could have been heading towards the Matheson house. Still, I haven't found anything to disprove my theory about Charles being forced to sign something, although it now seems like it wasn't Anne's pen that was used, because Mark Bellamy had the pen and he didn't get it from the party, he got it from the bar in the hotel. He did steal Charles's Rolex, but not from his dead body, like I thought. It was prior to death. Charles had taken off his watch for some reason, and popped it in the kitchen before heading out to the snuggery. I don't know why you'd take your watch off if your plan was to just go down and have some drugs with your friend. But yeah, that's what happened to the Rolex anyway. So I was wrong that Abbott didn't take the Rolex as payment against his overdue fees. Please excuse the fact I've got into the bed. I'm not just sitting on it anymore. But let's scooch over. Oh, can you see? Yes. Okay, so it's all coming together. They've gone to Abbott's house to arrest him, and he's fled, he's missing. So they've started looking around, going through the drawers and such, and they found the GoPro that was used to film Helen and Colin getting it on in the snuggery, and as blackmail material. Some people are taking it to mean, oh then yes, Abbott was the one doing the blackmailing. But no, Hawthorne is on my side, and he's saying, you know, it's Charles who was doing the blackmailing, and Helen was in on it, and it was all a setup specifically to provide material. And most of the information they got about the blackmail was from Colin, and obviously it's turning out to be false, including the fact that Colin said that Derek Abbott had shares in the French electrical company, and Hawthorne has just said that he checked, and Derek Abbott doesn't have any shares, so he's telling the truth in that area. So it's coming together in my favour. And they've just said, you know, they're talking about the fact that, yeah, it's Charles who's the blackmailer. Okay, slight minor difference. The fact that Abbott has the camera is leading Hawthorne to believe that yes, it was all, the blackmail was all set up by the Lemurziers, but it was Derek who actually was doing the sending messages to Colin Matheson and blackmailing him. So they're working together in that particular capacity, and that's why Derek was owed £20,000. It was for his work as a cover, a face for the blackmail system. Abbott has jumped to his death off one of the cliffs on the western end of the island. Possibly Hawthorne went to visit him last night in the story and tell him the police are going to come and arrest you tomorrow, in order to force that situation, because yeah, Derek left a postcard saying, I can't go back to jail, I can't do it, I'm not going to do it. So that was the conclusion of that event. I just had to turn on my camera to change the battery, and just the heavens have opened up, not with rain, with hail. Shouldn't be hailing. The roof opposite me that I mentioned with the layout of the building is metal, so yeah, that was quite a noise that you just missed out on because I had to change the battery. Aye. Just checked the social media of the states of Jersey, and they've been saying that emergency services are out clearing all the trees. It's like, oh well, the hailstorm is not going to be very helpful for them. Poor people, working hard and getting pelted with ice. They've gone to Anne Cleary's house. I really hope she's not the murderer. Oh, this is looking bad. Hawthorne is, you know, needling her and trying to poke some holes in her story, like she's the one who said that Charles and Derek Abbott had had a fight and a big falling out, and Charles was going to fire Derek, but this was, you know, 20 minutes before they were seen being all pally walking to the snuggery together, so she might have lied, and that looks really bad. So it had been mentioned previously that Anne Cleary's son had an addiction, and it had resulted in him taking his life. It's implied obviously that it was a drug addiction, but maybe it was a gambling addiction, and Charles Lemurzier owned gambling companies and websites. Oh, Okay, yeah, she's admitting to the murders. Oh, but she didn't do it alone. Catherine Harris, Mark Bellamy's assistant, who's been, you know, kind of in the background, popping in another story, is Anne Cleary's daughter. So the sister of the guy who they're kind of avenging. Oh. Hawthorne's using the fact that they're both vegetarians as one of the things that clued him into the fact that they're mother and daughter. It's a bit of a strange choice of evidence, but okay. Oh, okay. So the ace of spades and the €2 coin were hints or warnings to Charles that his gambling business, why he was going to be killed. Okay, the coin was a heads or tails gambling thing. That's why his hand was free, so he could flip the coin. That would determine his fate. Again, it's like tying back to the gambling. They say Catherine took the letter opener from the office earlier. Just like, how would she have known it was going to be there? Like I say, you can't guarantee someone's going to have a super sharp letter opener. So Anne Cleary knocked out Helen and carried her into the cave. Okay. Yeah, even Anthony isn't sure that Anne would be strong enough to carry Helen. And of course, she is dying, and so, like, she's not gonna go to trial. She's not gonna go to prison. Like, she'll probably be dead before then. And she was, you know, getting vengeance for her son as one of her last things to do before she passed away. Okay, so Anne didn't go to court. She had a heart attack before that arose, but Catherine did. She was charged with being accessory to murder, but found not guilty because they couldn't prove that she was in the snuggery when Charles was killed, and that she definitely knew what her mum was going to do. She said that she knew her mother intended to confront Charles, but not actually kill him. So, once again, I got it wrong. It was Anne Cleary. Yeah, I had no real inkling that it was her at all. I thought her pen was involved, but not her herself. I was kind of suspicious of Catherine Harris at the beginning, but then there was so much of the story where she didn't appear at all that I was like, okay, so she was back to being a minor character, not really a suspect. Fishing lines have nothing to do with it. Yeah, I mean, I still don't agree with some things, like the whole, like, so they did buy the duct tape back at home and brought it with them, so they had the plan, the setup. They were going to make him flip a coin to determine his fate. But they didn't bring a weapon with them. I guess maybe they could have, like, taken something like a kitchen knife if there hadn't been a convenient super sharp letter opener in his office. So maybe they, were relying on there being some kind of weapon in his house, but they couldn't rely on there being duct tape, so they took that. They also didn't take a coin with them. They nicked that from Mice's purse in the hallway. They did take the playing card, or at least got a playing card in order to send a message to him, but I don't think he understood that message. It was all thematically around gambling, but I don't think there was ever any suggestion that Charles Le Mercier saw the playing card on his windscreen and then was like, oh no, my life is in danger. No, he just thought it was some kind of stupid practical joke. He didn't realise it was a threat. Let me just consult my whiteboard for a moment. So let me see if there are any other loose ends that I would like tidying up. They didn't bind his right hand so that he could flip the coin as the final, like, little gambling element. to the story, although he wasn't actually able to flip it because he'd taken cocaine and he'd been smacked on the back of his head, so he fumbled it, and that's why it just fell onto the rug of the snuggery. They didn't deliberately leave it behind, but I don't know. His watch was missing because he'd taken it off earlier. I don't really understand why he took off the Rolex, unless it was like to taunt Mark Bellamy, because he placed it in the kitchen and he knew that Mark was a kleptomaniac. Maybe, I don't know. The way they got Charles down to the snuggery was he had been harassing Catherine, and she said yes, that she would hook up with him in the snuggery, basically. And that's how they knew that he would be there. Derek Abbott had gone down with him, but had left just like shortly after they went in there, took some drugs, and then he got his check and then he left. Oh, and Anne had actually pretended to leave the party much earlier, about like half an hour earlier, but had snuck back in, gone through the house, and was down in the snuggery hiding behind a curtain the whole time through that kind of 20-minute window of Derek and Charles arriving, having their argument, doing some drugs, writing a check. Derek left, then Catherine arrived. Then Anne stepped out from behind the curtain and smacked Charles on the head. As I expected, the whole NAB project was all just like a false lead, in terms of like, yeah, it was a major element of what was going on in the island and everybody hated him for it, and it provided a lot of motive for a lot of people, but ultimately his murder was about his gambling business, not the electrical business. So I was completely wrong about his hand being free in order to sign something. And I was wrong kind of about it being a crime of passion. Like it was a crime of passion. It was, one of anger and revenge, but it was premeditated. I really thought it was Colin Matheson, particularly as we headed further towards the conclusion of the story, because so often the killer isn't really mentioned as the things reach the climax, because the author doesn't want you thinking about them, and they had stopped mentioning the Mathesons, so I was kind of taking this like a good sign from my theory. Like, oh, okay, well, Hawthorne's gonna leap in and solve everything. In terms of the evidence that Hawthorne had, it was all there for the reader to decide to gather at that conclusion as well. It was to do with Anne Cleary's past and her son's death, which was all explained during a seance kind of scene, and it was to do with the pen, in terms of Anne had lent the pen to Catherine, which Hawthorne found weird, because it's like, it's this valuable pen, why would you lend it to this random girl that you don't know, apparently. There were some observational things that Hawthorne noticed about Anne and Catherine to show that they were mother and daughter, that the reader can't see. So like the fact that they looked kind of similar, had the same colour eyes, that kind of thing. There's no way, well, a very slim chance the reader would be able to figure out their mother and daughter. Oh well. Another failed case for the Fat Cat Detective Society. But I'm so glad I read it, and I still enjoyed it. And yeah, even though in stories like this where I failed to figure out who done it, I still enjoy the twist. Well, I often enjoy the twist, unless it's something completely nonsense. I don't like a kind of hand of God kind of approach, but this one was good. So thanks for joining me, not in Alderney, in Jersey. But yeah, couldn't find any murder mysteries set on Jersey. If you do know of any, let me know. I had since found another one called it's called Last Ditch by Nio Marsh. So it's a classic kind of golden age murder mystery, but all through the synopsis online it says that it's set in a Channel Island. It doesn't say which one. Maybe if I were to read the book itself it would explain itself a bit more, but I didn't want to go ahead with that one without knowing for sure. Maybe next time. Maybe next time I'll go to Guernsey, or something like that, but no. No, actually my next on location murder mystery to solve will be Death Comes as the End by Agatha Christie. It's set in ancient Egypt. I will be in modern Egypt in a couple of weeks. So that's my next one I'm intending to film. So thank you for joining me. Sorry I didn't get it right. Did you? let's try and improve the success rate of this detective agency. We're 0 for 0 at the moment. Oh well. Thanks so much. Bye.